guys to bring in. I'm going to bring in my buddy Paul Cott. He plays guitar in High Tone Son of a Bitch. I'm also going to bring in my buddy who you've seen during the debates, Jonathan Brown. He plays drums in Conan Neutron and Secret Friends. Coming up shortly, we're going to have another friend of mine, Pascual Romero, that sang in Pathology and played bass in This Moment. And I think he sang after Burden left in Fear Factory. Oh, what else did Pascual do? A bunch of shit. And then also Joshua Kahn Russell is going to be joining us as well. He heads the Wildfire Project. Big time activist and organizer, but came up in the hardcore scene as well. He just confirmed with me a second ago that he's gonna jump on this too. So we were supposed to talk about heavy music. Oh, do we lose Jonathan? There he goes.
Oh, I'm back. I had to adjust.
What got our whole conversation started, Paul? What was it that got it started?
Well, I think, this is something that I've thought about a lot, and I know that you and I have talked about before. But I think that it's a combination of different things. I think that I looked at a graph recently that that shows the ages of people who are supporters of Trump. And I was surprised that something like 65% of people who are in their late 40s through early 50s are Trump supporters,
Uh-huh.
And that correlates with advertiser information for like heavy music magazines. Like I think I may have told you, like Decibel magazine, the largest readership is exactly in that age range. And I've noticed that on like, whether it's Facebook groups or, the comment section of heavy music publications and websites, I've just noticed there's a lot of toxic shit out there, and it's one of those things, like there always has been some element of just sort of like, sort of nihilistic or, misanthropic kind of attitude in heavy music. And that's one thing, but you've just got this context where, people that you just never would have fucking expected seem to have just like flipped a screw, You've got like, Rob Miller from Amoebics, an anarcho-punk band, like one of the leading fucking, this like seminal fucking band in that genre, who's just gone full on fucking Holocaust denier, and he's lost his shit, and it's disturbingly common. So I think like one of the things that I've thought a lot about is the way that people who play heavy music and like to listen to stuff that's just disturbing sometimes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
will allow themselves to kind of like say, hey, I like a lot of stuff. I don't want to keep politics in music. Haven't really considered what the consequences of that are. Like if you just really don't give a shit, what ends up happening is you can create a context for acceptance, and it's one of those things. It's like I think about like how how many people I knew told me in 2001, after 9/11 happened,
Mm-hmm.
that I should watch Loose Change. You know what I mean? And it's like fucking Alex Jones, man.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's true. Like it was a really, I still have friends of mine who all say, well, they'll agree that like, it's true, science maybe exists, but then I'm like, yeah, all this shit kind of started with fucking the fucking Loose Change thing. And they're like, well, there's probably, I think there's truth to that. There's this like residual, unwillingness to kind of, I don't know. So I think it's one of those things that can be as simple or as complicated as we want to make it. You know what I mean? But I think from people who are playing this kind of music to make it, to decide, you know, like what they want to represent, and not be surprised if people who aren't within our community decide, because of lack of action from within, that they want to shut down tours and shows, you know, like that. I've heard a lot of, like, you know, people who have been really upset by, like, Antifa, for example. You're talking to me the other day about the Behemoth dude, and stuff like that. And so, you know, his thing is just this sort of nativism and sort of like really, you know, borderline kind of, you know, he doesn't think that he's a fascist because he's not a Nazi, you know, but he's a fucking, you know, super hardcore fucking Polish nationalist who has all kinds of, you know, authoritarian tendencies and stuff like that. And so, you know, people seem shocked when people who are anti-fascists, who are from other communities, who aren't some white European guy, are like freaked out by what he's advocating, you know? And I mean, that shouldn't really be a shock. If you're not willing to police yourself from within, then probably, you know, don't be surprised if people are going to do it from without. That's sort of my point of view about it. Yeah.
And John, we did. Who's got a Paul, you're not wearing headphones?
No, I'm just listening to speakers. Is it feeding back or something?
Yes. Yeah, it's loud.
I got a headset on. Is it me?
Nah, that's Paul. Paul's in the studio.
Is that better?
That's why it sounds so good, because he's in the studio with the big studio speakers.
Is that better?
Yeah.
All right.
So John, we did a whole episode on the podcast.
Yes.
About kind of race and heavy music. For those that never heard that episode, what was the, when I sent the call out for you and asked if you wanted to be on this show, what was the thing that made you go, you know, I got some shit to say?
Remember, it was like shortly after after Minneapolis. Yeah. And you know, I've always had stuff to say, but, you know, who'd listen? Until you came along. You know, like that part in Goodfellas where the cops are, you know, the woman's giving the cops all the stolen cigarettes, and he's like, you know, I'd complain, but who'd listen? Yeah. It's like I can connect anything to a movie scene. Anyway, I think it's always been a thing, because at least in our genre or genres, I'm more from the noise rock world, and not a lot of us, right? So no. I mean, and not even just
real quick before you finish. I'm going to let you finish. Do you think the more obscure the genre you get, maybe the wider it gets?
You know,
because you're in some, me and you are in some weird waters.
Yeah. I you know though,
we got the wokest white people in our genre, but it's still some weird waters.
I feel like if like when I like playing just regular, just rock and roll, you're probably still not gonna see a lot of us. But I feel and this is all the bands that I've seen, so, you know, it's probably what, 1%, 0.01%.
Yeah.
Of all the bands, you know. So So keeping that in mind, or the bands that I know of. How about that? Mm-hmm. It's all white. It's just all white. I don't know if there's any parsing. You know, I mean, I would say, sure. I mean, if you're going to take how many non-whites are in noise rock versus how many non-whites are in in hardcore, mm-hmm. You're going to be playing with small numbers either way. You know, I either way. Um, but I will say this. Like I was saying, I think it's something that as a black person, playing quote unquote non-black music, um, it's just always a part of it. So I always have things to say, you know. But like I said before, I certainly could have things to say, but who's going to listen, or who really cares to listen? And I think what happened after George Floyd in Minneapolis, a lot of people wanted to listen. Maybe a lot of people were more receptive to listen. But it always seems like like we talked about in that episode, when these incidents happen, there's always that wave of I want to know more. What's on right now? Yeah. Ooh, wow. Let me look at this thing on the internet. And it just goes away until the next thing pops up. And, and then recently, obviously more recently, we had Jacob Blake. And it all came up again.
That's right in your backyard, kind of, sort of.
In fact, we had Secret Friends practice in Kenosha, 15 blocks away. I left to come back to Madison.
Fuck, dude.
No less than a half hour before that happened. So on my way home, because it takes me about an hour and a half from Madison to Kenosha. And so I wasn't that far out of Milwaukee. I was maybe 20 minutes outside of Milwaukee. And people were already like hitting me. Are you still in Kenosha? My wife, are you still in Kenosha? I heard a black man got shot.
She's like, I'm trying to make sure it's not you. I know there's 7 in the state.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's that's any time I walk out the door, though. When my wife worries, and rightfully so, when I'd have band practice or whatever band I was in, because you never know if, like for me, if it's going to be my turn. I do think that, and it's a lot easier with COVID. I don't leave unless I got to go to the store or whatever. But I've certainly had my, at times where I've been followed. I've been, I haven't necessarily been pulled over in a while, but I certainly have been followed. Certainly been driving down a divided like boulevard, like later at night, cop drives by, turns around. Mm-hmm. I'm the only one out there, because it's later at night and I'm driving home from band practice. I've certainly had that happen plenty of times.
And do you feel like your band members don't have to deal with half of that shit?
We just went over the percentages, right? Yeah.
We don't. I don't know what's wrong with Jonathan. He's always so late to practice. I don't know.
Probably not. But speaking of which, I'll give you a story. Interesting story. I was in. I'll just say, just to keep people nameless. In one of the bands I was in the last 10 years. So that narrows it down to about 12 bands, 12 to 15. We were on our way to a show, kind of southwest from here. And we were going through the state of Iowa. And we got pulled over. And the person who was driving was being, let's just say he was being a dick about he was speeding. It wasn't, he was speeding, mm-hmm. And he was but the, my bandmate that was driving the car was being a dick about it. And I was sitting in the front seat and the bass player was sitting in the back. And so we were 3-piece at that time. And And all I could think of was, please calm. I'm thinking in my mind, like, just chill out. Maybe he'll just give you a warning. It's just a ticket, And he was getting more and more agitated over getting this ticket, and the trooper that pulled us over wasn't being anything. I mean, he was being pretty bland, actually. And all I could think of the whole time was, if anything happens, who do you think they're going to single out? Who's going to be the person in this situation that gets the added scrutiny? And luckily, the trooper just kind of took it in stride, and he gave him a ticket. And maybe he wouldn't have given him a ticket. Driver wouldn't have been, wouldn't have been such a dick about it. But either way, I mean, after we pulled away, and it took about a few miles down the road, so it was pretty quiet, and he's still kind of seething about it. And the person in the back, was like, "Why did you do that? Why didn't you just take it? JB's sitting here." and on first blush, if you didn't know, you'd think, well, why is he, but at the same time, he was right. And I was feeling it the whole time, like, dude, it was a perfect example of privilege. A good example of what if I were driving and acted like that? Which to me, I would never act like that. I can't act like that. There's no way I would be like, yes, sir, officer, sir. I'd be saying sir so many times.
Oh yeah. They were ready to fuck me up in New York, trying to get to fucking Todd Weinstock's house from Glassjaw. We're trying to get to his house after a show. Pulled over at the wrong spot. The cop came out, and I said, thank you, officer. We're lost. That motherfucker said, put your hands up. I was like, whoa. Welcome, Pascual Romero.
What's up, man?
Pascual.
Hey.
Paul. John.
Hello.
We still got one more person coming. Joshua Kahn Russell's coming from the Wildfire Project, and you might know him from the Michael Brooks Show. He came up in the hardcore scene in the East Coast. He definitely has some opinions on hardcore and heavy music. Me and John were just bitching about black people shit with Paul. So Pascual, Paul, Eddie Van Halen passed away. Some people don't care. Like what's his name? Stills? Was it Crosby or Stills? Which one?
It was David Crosby. Yeah.
David Crosby was like, eh.
Yeah.
He said, meh.
Well, I was saddened by it. I've designed guitars to look like Eddie Van Halen's guitar. I just dig the dude. I dig a lot of the early stuff and even some of the Hagar stuff. But in one of the Facebook groups I'm in, they have been, I wouldn't say make a big deal about it, but they've been kind of talking about Eddie's part Indonesian heritage.
Yeah.
Right.
Which no one talks about. I remember I was having a conversation with Boots Riley, and we were talking about black people. We were actually having this discussion, and he said, if you asked any white kid who their favorite guitarist is, if they say who their favorite guitarist of color is, they'll probably say like Jimi Hendrix. They're never going to say Kurt Hammett.
Yeah.
Right.
That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, like Eddie Van Halen's story of moving to the United States was, I mean, it was a story that a lot of people who are first generation who moved here would be familiar with. I mean, it wasn't fucking pleasant, like he was treated like shit, So, and it is interesting that the way that he's identified today is as this white guy, but that's not really his story or really the truth completely. And
Him
it's
and
kind of
his brother,
interesting
yeah.
to think about, like, I mean, I don't think he was shy necessarily about talking about it, but it's interesting to think about to what degree LA sort of made him sort of homogenize himself a little bit, you know?
Would you guys say the same thing about Slash?
Yeah, that's true too. You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, the guy was like forced to put his hair in his face on purpose because, you know, they didn't want people to see what he looked like, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of sold as like, oh, you know, he was ugly, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't know that was entirely really all that there was. I mean, we think about fucking, you know, 1 in a million lyrics, you know?
Was that the song?
Yeah,
Police
there's probably fucking more to the story than just the fact that
Yeah.
they didn't think he was attractive, you know?
And that's interesting because you look at Slash and Lenny Kravitz have the same racial makeup, right? Exact same.
Yeah.
Black mom, Jewish father. Why is one a black rocker and the other is this, as you put it, homogenized tan guitar player? Pascual?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say that there's like an aesthetic thing to that. I mean, Kravitz is a good-looking dude, but I kind of, in my optics, I really think like you also have to look at like what world they're in, and when you're looking at like hair metal, hair rock in the 80s, you're looking at a real white boys world, you know, and
Yeah.
I mean,
That's true.
you know, like being a mixed Hispanic person, and it like my whiteness was generally played up in most, you know, not on purpose, but like I just was kind of in with the white guys, you know. It wasn't like my identity was part of it. So but to go back to Slash, like I think that's probably why it was kind of washed out a little. Like I think it was that Kravitz came, you know, I mean, thinking back to like his real peak, like there was this little renaissance there where you had like, you know, Living Colour became like a really huge band, and then you had like Kravitz was like the new, you know, Hendrix, not that he truly was, but just that he was the one that reminded everyone, like right as that early 90s kind of 60s revival was sort of kicking off, and he really fit that role well, you know. And so I think that it may not have been like it really, I think, had more to do with just like what kind of universe they were coming from. You know, you had Slash in that whole 80s Sunset Strip thing, but then you had Kravitz coming up in this sort of like slightly more woke, slightly more like culturally relevant, you know, music renaissance that was trying to happen at that point.
Let Love Rule years, that Beatles revival thing. That
Exactly.
Does anyone remember Lenny Kravitz before he was Lenny Kravitz, when he was Romeo Blue?
I do not.
I don't know if it wants to.
That's for deep cuts. I'm a deep cuts Lenny guy.
I mean, but people knew that Lenny Kravitz's mom was Roxy Roker, so people knew he was black. I mean, at least that's how I feel about it. Nobody knew who Slash was. I mean, until, you know, all of a sudden this dude with aviator shades and a big giant top hat, you know, that could really play guitar. I mean, and like you said, you know, in the heavy metal scene, I mean, until Living Colour came around, really, you know, and then maybe even King's X to some extent,
Sure.
Nobody, you know, black people playing heavy music. I mean, you know, and Hendrix was just a mere memory.
Right.
Because Hendrix played as heavy, especially at his time, if not heavier than almost anybody.
Do we look at guys like Hendrix, though? And I ask this question to all of you. Do we look at guys like Hendrix and even guys like Bad Brains? Do we look at them as people that have kind of transcended their color into this other thing, like Michael Jackson, until all the shit came out about him and towards the end of his career?
It's tough for me because he was, I don't know, Michael's black. His whole family's black. All of them black.
Black ass Jets.
Grew up listening to him.
But
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying, but
sometimes
it's.
It's like that scene in Do the Right Thing where Spike Lee's asking John Turturro, or not John Turturro, I forget the guy's name. Like, no, it is John Turturro. Yeah. Who's your favorite? Yeah. Who's your favorite actor? Who's your favorite this guy? Who's your favorite this guy? Who's your favorite this guy? I kind of feel like there's certain people, Hendrix being one of them.
Yeah. I agree.
And I think that early incarnation of the Bad Brains where they kind of stay 27 years old forever. Right?
Yeah. It's kind of another thing that's sort of interesting about Bad Brains when you think about it is that they as a band were like super Christian, and then they became like, Rastafarian guys later. Like the band in DC, like they were really into the Bible and like, they were just fucking weird, but they were like undeniable. But the context was built for that. Like hardcore was more, people were questioning things, and I think that's one of the things that's like, dude, I grew up when we were 13, I grew up in the Midwest. Like my parents moved around. I was born in Detroit, lived in Illinois, North Carolina. And then we moved to Maine when I was 13. Mm-hmm. And like everybody in that town was into metal, It's like Iron Maiden tapestries and fucking, everybody was listening to fucking death metal and wearing puffy fucking shoes and sweatpants and no shirt and fucking player, fucking cinder blocks out in the yard with a fucking Chevy Nova on it, And so like shit like that going on, like it was 97% white in that state, And I mean, that was sort of the identifying culture in a lot of these like post-industrial fucking, Rust Belt areas, it's like hard rock and heavy metal, and it was very unforgiving. Those were the dudes. I mean, I was into punk rock back then, and I was part of the reason that I liked some of the music, the metal music, but like those are the dudes that would kick my ass, like that. Those were the guys who, like, one dude I remember pulled up to me. He's like, "Hey, you faggot!" And he had on a fucking t-shirt with a picture of Poison with full makeup on. It's like I was just like, "You got to be kidding me, dude!" So like I mean, come on,
And you, okay, and you, so you grew up in the Midwest and the East Coast too, right, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, we lived in Springfield in Illinois and as well, which is another like, I mean, it was, I mean, the stuff that happens in our country in general, like the legacy that we have to deal with in general is present in all those things. But I think what has been particularly striking is that even in the context of like heavy music, like it's one thing to like be like, yeah, man, this fucking like hard rock, heavy metal is like white boy fucking music, because it's true. It largely is true, But what's interesting is that genres where there's been more of a expression of a desire for more diversity, like punk rock or hardcore, are still white as fuck, Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's kind of like why, I guess. And what could we do to make it a more inclusive environment? You know what I mean? Like
now here's where I'm not gonna necessarily answer that question, because I don't think I have the answer to it. But Pascual grew up in New Mexico, and what was your scene like? Was it a little more diverse in your scene? Was it a little more brown in your scene?
Yeah, I mean, where I'm from, I mean, it's majority Hispanic and Native. So white is it was the minority growing up, especially in the neighborhood I grew up in. In fact, there were no white kids. I was the white kid, right? So so it was a little different. I mean, there is a deep Hispanic and Native scene for metal in the Southwest. And in other parts like Canada and stuff, there's a little bit of that too, and like Alaska and stuff. But yeah, so for us, it was a little different. Although once I started doing music for a living, and I was out in LA, it certainly became very clear that it was quite a bit of white boys club. I kind of, when I got to LA, I kind of went through a few different phases of metal, that was like from new metal to metalcore, and those are really heavily white dominated genres. I think you get into like thrash and death metal and you get a little more diversity. But even still, I mean, death metal is by no means a diverse place. It's like you've got like Suffocation and, a handful of other, and there are a bunch of Hispanic people, but again, like they don't really like talk about being Hispanic, like Tom Araya doesn't talk about the fact that he's freaking Chilean, and, people just sort of like their identity sort of fades into the woodwork when they can kind of, pass for not what they are, and even people like Kirk Hammett. I mean, it's like that dude. I mean, you look at him, you can tell he's ethnically mixed, but it's like, nobody even questioned it though. I mean, he looks like a straight up, like almost more like a Hispanic dude, and it's like, but yeah, it's just like it kind of, your identity sort of gets wiped away when you're in that scene, unless it's like blatantly obvious that you're something,
That's interesting, because I feel like, and I'll keep saying this until somebody proves me wrong. Heavy music is the last safe space for straight white dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty true. It's like, there's a ton of bands out there that are like, their whole thing is like, that's music to like fucking pump iron with your fucking bros to, and fucking hate your girlfriend.
But don't you think, but that's interesting, but don't you think even that world's shrinking somewhat? I mean, at least
I hope
as
so.
far as it's definitely with the negative parts, with everything with Burger Records over this year. Definitely in Madison, there was a minor shakeup because we had some people here associated with Burger Records bands. That just the complete. Do
you want to let people in on the Burger
Yeah.
Records thing? Because I'm in the dark about.
Oh,
Burger
you don't?
Records.
No. Well,
It's
it's
like
from
a
your
garage rock label that
from your neck of
with
from
the
the Bay
abuse
Area.
scandal.
They had a sex abuse scandal. I did a Burger Records festival. It was called
Burger Boogaloo, probably.
Burger.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, and I
Wasn't
mean,
the label
broke
wasn't the
the
label
fucking
not
logo.
associated with it? Like after, like they
No,
just
it was all
gave the
Burger
name?
Records bands.
Oh,
It was all Burger Records bands. A bunch of them, not all of them, but the headliner that year I worked it was like Devo, I think.
It started off, the festival started with Burger, and then it sort of spun off into its own corporation, I think. But basically, like, when all the shit kind of came down, that was sort of the thing, is the people who did the festival were like, we're totally not those guys. We just know them.
yeah.
And then eventually it's like, that's not going to fly. So they had to, that's fucking not going to happen anymore,
That festival, it's small for the festivals that I was doing for the company, but it's a crazy moneymaker, and it was one of the wider ones I've ever been to.
I believe it.
It's funny though, man. I mean, when
I
you think
believe it.
about festivals, dude. So like, here's a fucking story. So like Colossus did in 2006 at South by Southwest. We played the Vice party. So Vice had this like Vice Kills Texas party. That's like, it was during South by Southwest, but it was free, and there's like barbecue, and we shared the stage at that one with like a bunch of cool bands, including Rocky Erickson, who's like one of my fucking favorite ever, and it was one of the first shows back for Rocky. So it's just like, fuck yeah, man, we want to do this. But the prior year in 2005, Gavin McInnes was still associated with Vice. And I mean, it's a time when like he had flipped a fucking screw, But most people weren't really paying attention because they were just reading the do's and don'ts and fucking Vice, you know?
Mhm.
So they didn't even really notice that this guy is like going to fucking far right, like Nazi rallies and shit, and writing about him sort of sympathetically, you know? And in 2005, he had, like, under his direction, Vice had done this thing, and it was like a shock value thing is the way they played it up, where they flew Nazi flag downtown Austin, you know?
Wow.
And so, like, you know, we were invited to do this festival, and I had heard about that. And a lot of people just had, oh, yeah, it's funny, man. It's shocking, you know? And you know, I had concerns about it. You know, I talked to our you know, booking agent, eventually directly called the people at Vice, and they were like, oh, yeah, it's nothing like that will happen. We're, you know, it was a shock value thing, and we've apologized and whatever, you know. And I think, like, if I were to, I mean, obviously now I would be like, fuck you, you know, and not do it. But that's the kind of stuff I think that sort of, like, in the context of these shows, or like a band or a label like Burger Records, you know, you kind of find yourself like, I have, even whatever I may care about as a fucking white dude, I'm in a position where I'm like, you know, have probably been more tolerant than I should be or should have been, you know, and more forgiving than I should have been about shit that really was just straight up just fucked, you know? So, I mean, that's kind of something that I think about a lot, you know?
It's interesting that you say that, because as a black dude in this genre, I would say, I don't know how Pascual or John feel about this percentage. 80% of the time I walk into a room, someone's going to say something that the average person would conceive as racist to my face.
Right.
Living in the Midwest, it would be under whispers 95% of the time. but I know what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
But living in the Midwest, because, you know, Midwest are nice. You know, no one's gonna say anything to your face, but they sure are gonna whisper it.
Like I don't
neighbor.
even.
So
I honestly,
I hear what you're saying.
I wouldn't even know how and when to approach certain situations, because so much shit is just like commonplace. Like the story John tells about the going to practice and the police fucking with you. When Cindy and I were on tour with LaFin, we got pulled over a lot, like a really lot. Yeah. And sometimes the pullovers were really bad, where people were getting taken out of cars and shit like that. And you do all that, and then you got to go show up at a venue where people say these kind of snide comments. At a certain point, those comments just fucking roll off your shoulders, and you're like, yeah. Just the fact that I'm fucking here is like a victory in and of itself.
That's the thing that's interesting, though, right? It's like, I mean, coming from a variety of different perspectives, obviously, here, and I'm coming from the one that I have, but I mean, you know, you end up, I think, trying to contextualize stuff or just justify it or be like, hey, you know, it's almost like, you know, well, you know, I have to put up with some shit here, but this is, you know, I'm going to have to do it for this opportunity, you know? And that sucks, man. It's like, that's sort of a fucking paradigm that's created the conditions for the stuff I was talking about earlier in terms of the demographics, like the way that people that we're talking about, like a really serious shift among a lot of people who are into this kind of music, away from sort of stuff that's like misanthropic, or you could say is just like nihilistic or just confrontational, into like overt, like far right, fucking racist, fascist thinking, you know?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
No. I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, it's just kind of like that's a context has been built for that. And I mean, for my part, like, I just want to take, I want to take fucking responsibility for, any role that I've played in that personally, just in the by not having developed a more, kind of overt opposition to it. Like I said, that Vice story, it's like, I probably, really, I should have had a different reaction. I mean, we're talking about a guy, Gavin McInnes. It's like the point A to point B fucking trajectory there is huge. I mean, we're talking about the guy who founded the Proud Boys, So like, I mean, it's important to recognize that stuff that seems like what it might be, that's probably what it fucking is. And it's okay to say, like, fuck this, man. This is bullshit.
And that's what's so interesting about. So I was talking to he's going to be coming on shortly, Joshua Kahn Russell, and we were talking about black metal. He comes from the world of hardcore, and I guess for me those lines definitely cross. I cross the shit out of those streams. I don't mind the genres, but he was one of those kids that he stayed in the path of punk and hardcore, and it led him to the path of activism. And he didn't know about black metal, and he didn't really get it. And so we were talking about like Mayhem and Varg and all that shit. And he was like, "This sounds disturbing." which is like none of this shit sounds cool.
Which that's the point, right? But it's like that's what the appeal is, So yeah. I think that's one of the things that people have to sort of wrestle with. And that's what I was talking about before too. It's like, if you're gonna think that Death in June is cool, then you shouldn't be fucking surprised, and you're not gonna really like internally fucking police your own scene. You shouldn't be fucking surprised if somebody is standing outside the venue fucking throwing rocks at it or whatever, at some point. Like,
and what's the deal with
a shock, Can
you explain to me, because I don't, silly me, explain to me the whole Death in June thing. They're supposed to be like fascists or something?
Yeah, I mean, they are.
Oh, okay.
There
is no kind of
overtly, and there are a lot of people who are, within the context of the same thing's true at the edges of noise rock, right? Like, you've got people who are playing just abrasive music that with the intent of being confrontational and abrasive, but. Right. You think like back in the late 80s, early 90s, like a guy like Jim Goad, who was like Answer Me was a fanzine that I think everybody fucking read that shit. Mm-hmm. And that dude's an overt fascist, straight up. Like, he's not, covering it up at all. I mean, he's not a Nazi. Mm-hmm. He's a fascist. There are a lot of different kinds of fascists, Mm-hmm. And, there are guys who are, the guy who wrote the fucking, the book that was made into that movie about Mayhem. Eventually, what is it? Fire or something, or I can't remember the name of
Lords
the
of Chaos.
That dude also calls himself an eco-fascist, and he's like, plays sort of like noisy, kind of music. So it's sort of, you're skirting this like nationalism and ultra-authoritarianism and overt fascism. And people will be like, well, we're not Nazis, and it's like, that's where we're at. I mean, that is intentionally sort of the dark appeal of that kind of stuff. And so people have to make decisions. Like, if you want to not have that be the association that scene has, man, I feel like that's a hard fucking task. I remember, still in the late 80s and early 90s when I was coming up in punk rock, we were actively fighting, like fist fighting and physically fighting Nazi skinheads to kick them out of our shows in our community. And here in the Bay Area, I mean, it was super violent. I know a lot of people who have tons of stories about that shit. And those people were forced to fucking leave. They were extricated from the fucking scene. So that was a really overt thing that had to happen. If that hadn't taken place, then the punk rock scene would probably be, there would be like Nazi punk bands, a lot more than there were, So, you have to actively do it, I feel like, and there's a desire among a lot of people who are into certain kinds of metal, including black metal, to be like, hey, let's just not really, address it. And, allow stuff like, people who are overt fascists to like have a merch table at a show and be like, well, the bands aren't fascists, stuff like that. And it's like, that's not enough. Like you shouldn't be surprised if that's the context that you're building, if people who are outside of your community are going to be fucking really pissed about it and come knocking at the fucking door. That's what I feel like,
I agree with that. I want to welcome Joshua Kahn Russell. Who's echoing?
Could be Josh, me.
I don't think it's me. I'm on mute. But hi.
Joshua is with the Wildfire Project. He is an old school hardcore head that came up in the hardcore scene on the East Coast. Him and I had a long talk about this heavy. Sorry, there's a horrible dog in this thing. It just broke my train of thought. But I just want to introduce Josh. Josh, welcome to the show. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It was a fun moment to come in. Paul, that was also part of my story, was fighting Nazis in the punk scene in my youth too.
Where are you from, dude?
I grew up in Connecticut. And so
okay, man, I lived in Maine as a kid. So it's like Maine, fucking Portland and Boston, the FSU skins and Hammer skins and all that shit.
Yeah, exactly. For us, it was in Meriden, Connecticut. It was specifically like, Connecticut has so much wealth next to so much poverty. So there are a lot of poor white kids who are really vulnerable to neo-Nazi recruitment, or at least were at that time, where they would come in and say, hey, I have a story to tell you about why your life sucks.
Yeah.
And it was, my first kind of engagement politically was when I was 13, and it was confronting Nazis at shows and stuff like that.
That's insane to have to confront.
It was really, I mean, dude, my buddy of mine, Dave, his entire face was crushed with a hammer. Like, it had to be rebuilt, It was really pretty brutal. And I mean, ultimately I left. Like, that's a major reason that I live in California, It was too fucking dangerous, dude. I booked a Born Against show in Portland. And I mean, after that show, I was chased. I was chased with, at first, like, a bunch of dudes. Then it was a bunch of hammer skins. Then it was a bunch of guys with like bats and shit. Then it was fucking, I pulled this lattice work off this staircase and hid under it and pulled it back under, but I could hear the fucking guys circling the block fucking. So, they were out to fucking kill me, dude, and I just eventually was like, fuck, dude, I'm going to die here. I mean, and I appreciate the fact that where I live now, like in the Bay Area, the reason that this was a safe place to be is because other people had done that for me. I mean, I know a lot of those people now who, like, they got fucking beat down. People died. And they fucking cleared house, and this has become a safe space for people to fucking be and play music like this, Whereas, if you live in Boston, it's really not, I mean, Connecticut too. It's like, it's still, it's still contested ground,
That's why I don't fuck with them spots that y'all was in. I go to the hood spots to play, like Bridgeport. Last time I was in Connecticut, we played some hood. Like, we played with hip hop groups. Like, it was in the hood spot in Bridgeport. I was like, damn, this is what fucking poverty looks like. Some real shit.
We used to do shows in Bridgeport all the time. It was at a VFW hall that we would always go to over and over again.
There was actually a legit spot out there called Two Boots.
Oh, I haven't heard that. It's been a minute since I've been in Connecticut.
Oh, that shit's closed. Everything is closed. Everywhere. I got posters on my wall from like 7 years ago, which isn't even that long ago. And every venue on that motherfucker is done. Like, COVID has changed the landscape of the music that we do on a level that we just don't understand.
Yeah. It was already declining before this too. So it was like, it was already not a great situation. And this just was like the nail in the coffin.
The venue I met Pascual at is gone.
Yep.
And that was not that many years ago. 6 years ago?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Is the Frequency still open in Madison, Jonathan? Is Jonathan still there?
Oh, you mean Joshua?
No, Jonathan. There's a black guy.
Oh.
JB. He's frozen.
Yeah, I see
He
that.
is frozen. He's frozen.
Oh,
in
that's
time.
fucked up.
You just put a picture in front
There
of
you
the
go.
camera.
Your black ass is gone, John.
Voted off.
You got voted off the island.
Yeah.
There can only be one. You got Highlandered.
No,
That's how these scenes really do work. That's
the energy we need in this
hey,
music
you
scene.
know what? I noticed maybe this happened to Pascual. I know it ain't happened to y'all two motherfuckers. But I've definitely gone in places where you're in a little town where there's one black dude in the scene, and then I show up, and it's just fucked up the whole like novelty of him being there. And homie looks at me like, we got problems. He's not that cool.
That's funny.
Fuck him.
Yeah, I've got the I was joking around, like, you know, being a mixed race Hispanic dude. I call myself a White Walker. You know, I can walk into, yeah, like, you know, I don't really have an accent, and I speak Spanish and I have a really Spanish name, but like I can, like, if people don't know that about me, I can probably kind of skate by under the radar. But like, there's the other part of me that's like I can't go into these spaces and be too like forthright about who I am either. So it's like it's not a big deal in big cities, but when I get into places like Knoxville, Tennessee and stuff, like I'm like real like hesitant to get into that get to know you phase with fans or not even our fans, like, especially when they're not there to see me, and I'm just like touring with the big band or whatever. And it's like, you know, you can see a real tone shift. Like, you can kind of start a conversation with these guys, and like, they'll be like, oh man, you guys are real good and blah, blah, blah. And then like, they'll ask me my name, and then it'll take like 5 times for them to even understand what I'm saying. And then, but it's like the tone changes, because then they're like, what kind of name is that? And then I'm like, well, it's a Spanish name.
What kind of name is your name?
Dude, I get asked literally verbatim that question all the time on tour, and it's like, what kind of name is that, or where's that name from? And
There's not to interrupt you, but as an aside related to that like way that people think about stuff, there's this is Jules. There's so in Maine, you know, kind of in the kind of out there a little ways. One of the first things that I was ever involved in that was really a political action was I joined DSA when I was like 13 out there, and there was a chicken farm that trucked in people who were, you know, Central American, Mexican people from throughout Latin America, South America and stuff. And it was like slave conditions kind of stuff. So it was an organizing effort, kind of a worker organizing effort, and an effort to also get the guy, you know, fined for the stuff that he was doing and whatnot. But anyway, I was out there, and I was at a convenience store, and some guy was standing in line, and he's an old Maine guy. So he's like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't know about them people, what they're talking in some weird way. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're saying. And the cashier at the store was like, well, you know, that's just, you know, that's the way they talk. It's their language. And he was like, I don't know. You're talking that Mexican, you know? And he's like, you know, Jesus Christ spoke American, and that's good enough.
Dude. No, I wanted
to get out there, and you're like, fuck, dude, I'm in it here, you know?
So I was on tour with a band called Divine Heresy, probably about like 11 years ago now. And the guitarist is a dude named Dino Casares. So he's a pretty well-known guitarist in you know, extreme metal. He was in the band Fear Factory, still is. but he's a Mexican dude, and he's a pretty clearly Mexican dude, and
Yes.
um,
Very large, clearly
yeah,
Mexican.
he's a big Mexican dude, and I get a lot more Mexican around him. So I'm one of those people that you know, because I speak Spanish and stuff, it's just like I code switch. So like, you know, I just speak Spanish to Dino, like especially when I'm trying to say something like around other people that maybe don't want to hear it. So we were in we had a problem with a bearing on our trailer in La Grande, Oregon, and it's like in the middle of the Oregon Trail, and it's a tiny town. I think it's a college town, but it's not like a versatile college town. And we go there, and so Dino and I we kind of pulled aside and like talked in Spanish a little bit to like talk about the issue, and like, you know, should we pay these guys to do this, or should we just like say fuck it? And we ended up saying fuck it, left the trailer, rented a U-Haul trailer, and just like took off. But we noticed the whole time we were there, like people were acting real fucking weird with us, and we thought it was just because we were speaking Spanish. I was like, dude, you know, these fucking white people in the middle of nowhere, they just like freak out when they hear this. But then I was like, this is kind of like not, I mean, it's just, Spanish isn't something like you hear it everywhere, and even in small towns there's Mexicans that work at McDonald's and stuff, you know. And so it's like, so I don't know, it kind of put me off, but I was like, whatever, like they were acting super sketchy with us, and we just bounced. And as we were on our way out of town, I was about to turn onto the freeway, and I noticed cops behind us with the lights blaring, and I'm like, fuck. So I stop, pull over on the on-ramp kind of off to the side, and we waited there a few minutes, and it was like literally like 3 minutes or something. I'm like, nobody's coming up. And so I'm like, I'm going to roll down the window and see what the fuck's going on. And I can just barely hear like in the background, like, step out of the vehicle. And you know, it's like, Jesus Christ. All right. So, and it was, they were saying, driver, step out of the vehicle. And so I was driving. And so I get out, and because of the way I stopped, I was like halfway around a corner. So it was like the van and the trailer. So I couldn't really see them at all. And, I kind of go walking around, and finally I get around the trailer, and there are like 6 cop cars behind us. And I only saw the one, and all of them have their guns drawn. And I'm like, fuck, dude, like this, first off, like, there's no reason you pull people over like this unless something's up. And so I throw my hands up immediately. And, like, I'm just like, okay, like my hands are up. I'm just, don't fucking shoot me. And I start, you know, and they like, you know, called me towards the car. Everything was okay. They cuffed me. They stick me in the back of the car, and I'm just like waiting, and they just like approach the van, and like this cop asked me like, okay, what are you doing and why are you here? And I was like, well, we're a band and we're on tour. And then she's like, who's the what did she say? It's like, who's the Latino in the van? And I'm like, he's my friend Dino. He's a musician. We're a band. We're on tour right now. We threw a bearing on our trailer. We rented a U-Haul. We're just on our way to our next show, which was in Vancouver. And she's like, okay, well, just hang tight. And so I'm sitting in the back of the cop car, cuffed, and like, Jesus, dude. And like probably about, I don't know, it was like a good 15 minutes. Like, no, they didn't pull anyone else out of the van, but I couldn't really see because we were sort of around the corner from where I parked. So it was like tough to know what was going on. They finally come back, and she like pulls me out of the car, and then she uncuffs me, and she's like, I'm really sorry. This was a misunderstanding. He fit the description of a Mexican who murdered someone here like some weeks ago or something. And I was
because
like,
he was Mexican.
And I, to be honest with you, like, for Dino to fit the description of a Mexican, like just any Mexican at random, like that's really unlikely, you know.
That's fucking stretching it. Yeah.
I mean, he's a big fucking dude. Like, you just don't see Mexicans that look like him with long ass hair and just this big fucking dude like rolling around everywhere. So I don't know where they got that from, but yeah, that was like a fucking ordeal. But I'm positive the reason they called was because when he went up and like was talking to them at first, like nobody said anything, but the second we spoke Spanish to each other, all of a sudden everyone got fucking sketchy with us. And like, I'm positive that's what it was. And I learned my lesson. Like, I just chose from then on not to speak Spanish in front of fucking anyone that I didn't know in those kinds of towns, because it's just like, it's risky, man. It's weird.
Well, I mean, they're gonna fuck with you regardless. I told you about the time me and Chicky had a blown tire and they pulled the guns on us.
Yeah, man.
And they were looking for a white guy.
God damn.
They were very confused.
Like, motherfuckers, it was like the movies where they get behind the car with the guns on you and shit like that. And the sheriff was running down the middle of the street. No. Because he knew that they were looking for a white dude. They had Cindy on the fucking ground with the AR on her. And it's like, word? Like, y'all was looking for a white guy? Okay.
Yeah, no.
And then you got to go play a show after that.
Yeah, that was the thing. We made it on time that night too. It was, we were hauling, dude. We had to go from Denver to Vancouver that day.
That's a really shitty drive.
Well, you know, like you get those. I don't know if you've ever had to book a tour where you had to follow a bus in a van. You know, so it's like,
don't do it.
Worst. We were doing that in Indiana, and this is a pretty good example of just like opposite day kind of, you know, just privilege scenario. It's a little bit of sort of switching it up though too. Like I was going maybe 95 in Indiana, where it's like that's a serious crime in that state. God.
Yeah.
You can't do that apparently. But it's like we had to catch up, you know. We were in that exact situation where we had an 8-hour fucking drive. Everybody had to pee every 15 fucking minutes, and you know. And then I got pulled over. I didn't even notice that the cop, because we had a trailer behind us. I didn't even notice the cop for like 2 or 3 minutes, you know. And I was going like 95. He was so mad, like he was just infuriated, in a rage when I finally pulled over, and he made me get out. I got in the car, but he didn't cuff me. I mean, I was, you know, it's like a felony criminal speeding charge in Indiana. I sat in the front seat with him, and he was like, you know, I'm going to take your van. I'm going to, you know, and it was Easter. And I was like, well, you know, praise the Lord. Happy Easter. And he was like, his eyes changed, you know, and he was like, yeah. I was like, well, you know, God has a plan for us all, you know. I know that I made a mistake here and that sort of thing. And ultimately, you know, he's like, I'm just going to reduce this to like, it was you know, I was going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit on the ticket. But that's like, that would never fucking happen. I mean, this is like Bible Belt fucking, you know, Klan territory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's no fucking way. I mean, I thought I was fucked anyway, you know? I mean, I pulled out all the stops on that one, you know? And
have you ever played Indianapolis, Jonathan?
Oh yeah, play at the Melody Inn a few times. Last time I was there, played at Joyful Noise a couple times.
Is that like a normal thing for you Midwesterners? Do you guys have to play Indianapolis? You know,
it's funny. I've only in a couple of bands have I played in Indianapolis. It always seemed like if it wasn't the Melody Inn, there really weren't a lot of other places. It was just one of those towns that even other bands that I played with, like from Chicago or Milwaukee or Minneapolis, if it wasn't the Melody Inn, there really wasn't anywhere else. Now Bloomington was a spot that I probably played at. Bloomington, Indiana. I probably played there more than I played Indianapolis.
I've played Terre Haute.
Really? I've never played there.
I played Terre Haute, and there's another. What's the other little college town in Indianapolis? Not Bloomington.
Oh, up north. I know which.
South
Evansville.
Bend?
No,
South
Evansville.
Bend. Yeah, South Bend, Bloomington, Terre Haute, and Indianapolis.
Yeah. No. Let me ask
those
you guys.
Those are I mean, not even really. It's not like it's Austin or something like that. You know? But it's still like an oasis in the midst of like. It's fucking scary. Dude. Even for a white dude, it's like it's fucking could be terrifying and like driving through parts of like that area. You know, when you're in the country out there.
But don't you feel like though? Don't you feel like with the music that we do with punk, and especially to Jonathan's point, like noisier shit that's a little more obscure, no matter where you play. Do you ever feel like if someone's crazy enough to book the band with the black dude in it, then that's probably where the cool kids in the town are, or at least the outcast kids are in the town? You ever
Or
feel
they
that
have
way?
no idea.
That's
or they
fucked
don't
up.
even know.
I want you to know. I don't want neither one of us to be surprised when I walk in.
Yeah.
You brought one
I
of
know what
those
you're
with you.
saying.
That's a legit fucking, I mean,
Green room.
fucking green room kind of thing. I mean, straight up, especially like the experience of like living in, but it's true in like, I mean, it's true in Wisconsin. It's true like throughout much of the United States, I think.
Like where you're from.
There's an unknown element that's been, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's like there's this part of this stuff that's a thread in there that creates the condition where it's like you don't really fucking know. That sucks,
Like
Yeah,
here's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to go back to something before the internet rudely cut me off. Is that you were making a statement about taking the shine off the one black guy that's at the show? I have experienced that, definitely. But more so, I've experienced the opposite. And I don't know if you mentioned this at all, but I've experienced the opposite where I show up and I start setting up my drums. In fact, I remember the first time I met Cassie Green, and she played with a band called Dead Halos with Tony Ash.
Yeah.
From Secret Friends.
Mm-hmm.
And
Coliseum, and also the Great Coliseum.
Yep. He played at Coliseum as well. I remember when I walked in, and she saw me, and I saw her, and I was like, "Yes, somebody, another black person." And this is Louisville, Kentucky, and my family, both my parents are from Louisville, and from the West End, and we were playing on the East End. And growing up when I was a kid, and we go to Louisville all the time, and it's a very de facto segregated city. Most of the black folks live on the West End, white folks live on the East End. That's changing a bit, but definitely where the place where I played at, the Mag Bar.
I played there.
If you've been there, Mag Bar. When I was a kid, you probably wouldn't seen too many black folks in that side of town.
I was the only one there when I played there.
Yeah. See, I wasn't in the like there or Kaichu or all the places I've played at are on East End, in Louisville. But I mean, we still have a good friendship to this day. I mean, it's funny because I've told you about the PRF events, and for anyone who doesn't,
that's how I met you. We might have been the only colored folks there at that show. I think. I'm pretty sure you and I were the only ones there.
People, yeah. Besides my friend Andy, who I brought with me, who lives
so you
down
had to
the
bring
street
one
from Motswood. I did. I did have to bring one. I thought that was part of how you got in. Bring your own Negro.
That's how you know you're at like the wokest show ever if you get a discount for bringing a black person.
I got 2. What does that get me? But I mean, God, you took me off my
sorry.
Off my thought. No, that's but that was funny though. But what was I gonna say?
You were gonna say you and I toured together as 2 black people just to fuck up.
Yes,
all those
we did.
towns.
I was just telling, and I'll even say, I was just telling my wife about how when we went on that tour, and I was like so excited to be able to play with you, because I'll be honest, I have never played in a. This is how crazy this is. I've never played in a. I played in a blues band with another black man, but I've never played in a rock band with another black man or woman, ever, until I played with you.
That was my.
sad.
True story. I was in Des Moines, and I was talking to a guy in a very large hardcore band.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation, and we were talking about black people in heavy music.
Was it Slipknot?
And it was not Slipknot.
Okay, all right, just making sure.
I'm not gonna try to, because I don't want to call dude out. He's not a bad guy at all. He's actually a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And he didn't say this as being a dick at all. He was like, unfortunately, he actually had prefaced it by saying, unfortunately, and I want to get you guys' opinion about this, especially Josh and Paul that come from the hardcore world. He said, if there was an all black band, it would be looked at as a novelty. And
yeah, which is isn't that strange? Like, where it's that's just it's interesting now though. Like, living here in the Bay, like a number of people that I've played with have been, folks who are Latino. In High Tone, like the last record, the woman who's Latino, like the guy who's playing synth and stuff is of mixed race, but he's black guy with very light skinned features, And I think there's some of that code switching stuff going on for him sometimes too, and some, it's the complication of all of it, But like, it seems like generally here the dynamic exists where there really is a lot more. There are some great fucking bands here now who are like some like sort of death punk bands, and some that are African Americans, female people. Like it feels like there's like really an upswelling of just a greater representation of people in music here, locally. But like, I don't, again, I think the context for that was built, like the reason that that's true here is because the context for a greater amount of diversity was created here, And you have to do it. You have to like make it intentionally, fucking make it possible to do that,
Yeah.
And like to what you said, Jason, it's like this is sort of this kind of music for a lot of fucking white dudes who just want to fucking like get yoked and fucking hate women or whatever they want to do. Like that their perspective is that this is their last fucking like island to fucking claim, So there's a lot of resistance to the idea that people should even do that, I feel like I see that on message boards and shit. It's like, people fucking like, there's some real fear. I think it is, fear and resentment and anger and all kinds of stuff.
I want to get into that. Josh, you have something you want to get off your chest?
Oh no, I mean, to be honest, it's actually been a minute since I've felt like I've been a part of a music scene. So this is a little bit dated, but like, I remember in Connecticut, the relationship that we had with like the New York kind of crust punk scene or the New York hardcore scene, where in the city there was a really multiracial punk scene, and there wasn't in Connecticut. And Connecticut, the scene, in the context of us fighting Nazis and shit, it was very politicized, and there was a way that like, the way that race was talked about was so weird. It was like, it was aspirational in this weird way where like, when there'd be even like, female fronted bands, they were celebrated to the degree that it was really tokenistic and sort of over, like it was, which to me, even at that time, and we were talking about this last night, like it just revealed how fucking low the bar was. That's just like a couple of women out front or, a couple of black kids starting bands was suddenly, hailed as like, oh, we're this sort of like beacon of we really are what we say we want to be. And that was, to most of my friends who were not into heavy music, it was laughable, you know. And I do remember coming out to the Bay Area and just experiencing, or even, you know, like when you were saying before about like, you know, black bands being a novelty, there was a way that I remember growing up, we listened in such dedicated ways to bands like Death or Bad Brains or Fishbone in a way that was, it was a novelty, but what was also a novelty was having racialized politics on purpose. And like, so it on one hand, yeah, I mean, it was interesting to pull apart, but what all of it just revealed was like, I don't know. I maybe I came from like a weird self-loathing section of the scene, but it was like, honestly, a lot of white kids who hated the fact that the scene was so white and felt shitty about it, but also didn't know how to do anything else because that was their own bubble that they were in. And it was one of the reasons why I gravitated away from punk was it was so knotted up and confused, I think, you know.
So that's interesting that you say that, and unfortunately we lost Paul. I think his internet connection is down. Because this is what I wanted to ask you guys. So the last tour I went on, I saw you, Pascual, on that last tour. Actually, the last night.
Yep.
We made that fateful drive back from Albuquerque to Oakland. I felt like, and I don't know how I feel about this, and there's a reason why I talk to you guys and why I like all you guys. And Josh, I know we just like met, but I've heard you speak before, and I like your the context in which you put things in. I felt like there was this demarcating line now with music, where before, because we only had terrestrial radio, MTV, and whatever underground scene you were adjacent to, you could kind of slide into a lot of different genres that you liked. And now, because I can listen to exactly what I want to listen to, whenever I want to listen to it, and I'm going to keep getting exactly what I want, there's these little micro scenes. And playing this last tour, playing in their micro scene, if you will, it was a scene of people of color, which I'd never seen, which of course I dug. It was a lot of queer and non-gender conforming people of color, which was cool, right? I'd never seen that before, like a whole scene of it. Like I'd never seen that. That was cool. But it was so. I'm getting an echo. Somebody's echoing. That's Paul. It was so confining that it felt like it couldn't grow, and it didn't feel very inclusive of anything else. And so when we ask those larger questions of kind of like, how do we get beyond this? Like, I'm not opposed to having that safe space for those for people that feel marginalized. I mean, I get it. I can only imagine what it must feel like. I know what it feels like to be me going to a show, but add gender nonconforming on there, add, queer on there, and I'm sure you're getting shit on even worse. Or maybe they feel more comfortable to shit on you.
Yeah, I think, and we really talked at length about this.
We talked like 4 or 5 in the morning.
Yeah. It was a work night, dude. I got like an hour of sleep. Yeah, it was. It's tough, man, because so I come from a world where our scene is culturally really different than most scenes, and so we exist in this scene where it's almost. I mean, nowadays it's a little different, but when I growing up, especially in Santa Fe, not Albuquerque, but Santa Fe is it was so deeply Native and Hispanic that it was there were about 3 white kids, and then the rest were Hispanic, and then 15 Native dudes. And it was always and the safety of that was not really recognized, you know, because we just were like, this is the culture here, this is how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But when you got into the larger scene, like, so like we'd go to a big example I can think of is, you know, in like 94, 95, I went to a Pantera concert, and I was actually there to see Neurosis. They were opening for them, and
Damn.
And I was, I mean, don't get me wrong, I liked Pantera back then. It was fine. But I like was not ready for the cultural difference in that scene, even in Albuquerque. Like there were like legitimate skinheads there. There were like a lot of like white kids who were like very like hostile towards other people in a way that it felt really disingenuous. Cause, and this is the thing that,
were they fucking hostile?
They were largely hostile. No, but they really. The thing was that like I wasn't really prepared for that because like I grew up in such a safe little bubble of diversity and minority bubble, you know, that I kind of felt like really thrown off by it. But that kind of goes back to what you were saying about how a lot of these scenes kind of like tolerate things a little too much, and like kind of how black metal is like that, like and that scene like really was very tolerant of that like Nazi inclusion, you know, and like I'm not gonna make any value judgments about Pantera. Like I don't really care. Like I know Phil's got his weird shit going on, but like. It was just like, I was just like, this wouldn't be cool where I'm from. Like if a Nazi walked into our fucking show, they'd be fucking out. And like here they're just around, and like people are like, who don't seem to be Nazis are just like talking to them. And it was like, I don't know, it was really weird to me. And that sort of like caught me off guard. And to sort of go back to what we were saying about that scene that you were in on that tour, like, I feel like, it's like real easy to be an outsider to it without kind of, you know, you can kind of accidentally be an outsider to it because you're like, oh, it's not enough that I'm a minority, you know, it's like I have to have more like I'm still kind of an outsider because like the real nitty gritty of this group is that, you know, it's a queer and non-binary space, and it's a, you know, it's an inclusive, like gender inclusive space, and it's like and sometimes it gets real hard to navigate into that, you know, and it's like kind of, you know, I don't know, like I mean, I'm not comparing them to a scene that has anything to do with Nazis or anything. I mean, I really, if anything, I compare them to my scene that was like diverse and full of minority people. But at the same time, like walking into that can be hard because you are, you know, your identity comes from having to fight the outside world a lot, except that you're walking into a space where like they also have to fight the world you're from on top of that. And especially like queer, like anything that's like queer and not gender normative, you know, you got like Hispanic kids that, yeah, like, I mean, there weren't gay kids where I grew up because they were so scared of what would happen if they came out, you know, and so like we may have been a minority culture, but like we also had like sort of a way of othering people within our group if they were any, you know, different. And even I dealt with that as a mixed race kid in that culture, you know, and so, you know, that's all to say, like, I really, you know, we had a talk, and I have my opinions about like the woke culture and like how some of that maybe, you know, comes from a disingenuous place, but like, but navigating that
woke for all seasons,
yeah. And you know, but it's hard, man. Like, you know, we clash at that point, right? Like, I mean, not necessarily in that world, but like, you know, there's like these subcultures that are trying to like be really inclusive to their own, and then you kind of walk in and it's like, well, it should be enough that I am, you know, a person of color and I respect these things and I want to fight for the same ideals. But then there's like a point where you step on some toes because like you don't know the language, you don't know the proper like, you know, the context of everything, and you're trying not to be a dick, but sometimes you are because you accidentally called him her or her him, and that happened. That happened. Okay, this was the point where the rest of the band, they didn't quit because we you know, you saw us all together, but they were like mentally done. Yeah, we were in, and I wanted to tell you about this, Josh. We were in Richmond, Virginia, and I think me and John might have had this conversation. We were in Richmond, Virginia, playing this show, and the kid that threw the show was he was, how do you pronounce it? How do you say it? He identified
maybe just like gender neutral kind of they them.
Sure, it was they. Yes, thank you. So no one had a problem with anything, right? We didn't have a problem with anything, but there were definitely some people there that were cisgender that they weren't looking for trouble. Nobody was there looking for trouble. This was not one of those shows where people were looking for trouble, but there was a couple. I had never been in a room full of black kids listening to heavy music. Never happened to me. It was the coolest shit ever.
That's pretty exciting.
I stopped that shit. This was in Richmond, Virginia.
Right.
It was at this really cool restaurant. The guy that had ran it had lived in the Bay for a while too, and it was like a Cajun restaurant. The food was off the hook. Like everything was good. The band's all in a good mood until we played the show. I stopped the show at one point and I said, I've never seen a room full of black people, so excuse me if I look really happy right now. This is the craziest shit I've ever seen. And it was a kind of a diverse crowd of black people. There were some people there that was just there because it was a thing to do. And they were more from the hip hop world. There was definitely kids that were there from the metal world. So there was this weird mix of moshing and please don't hit me. You know that thing. So I had said, I was like, all right, this is the last song. I know you guys want to mosh, but let's keep in mind there's motherfuckers here that don't do that shit. So we can all jump, right? And everybody got hella juiced. It was fucking beautiful, right? We're all excited. And as I walk away, bam, this black chick hits this white dude, knocks him out. White dude gets up, he's like, what did I do? And I'm sitting there like, well, yeah, what did he do? Because I didn't see anything. And so she hit him because he had a Burzum patch on.
Yeah.
Which is a black metal band that is known for having a real racist singer. And so the dude's like, what? And he's sitting there like, what? And and she's like in tears. She's so upset. She goes, you knew you wore that motherfucking patch here in front of all these motherfuckers. And security walks up and they're kind of like, what? And security looks at the one white dude and he just goes, hey man, you gotta go. Like, I don't know what you did exactly, but I'm trying to live my life too. So he takes him outside.
But that's kind of like, that's sort of what I've been thinking a lot about and what I mentioned sort of earlier. Like, I don't think that, I think it's interesting that he was just surprised or didn't really understand why that would be. Like, he just never even fucking thought that maybe that would bother somebody.
No.
Like, you know, and I mean, that's kind of like, well, you know, I don't think it should be that fucking shocking. You know?
I think these kids, and this is just, maybe this is my naivete. I think because he was a kid and he apologized to me. He sent me an email after he found the band, sent us an email. It was like, please come back. We really liked you. I'm sorry this all happened. Him and the girl were having a heated dialogue. She was very upset. And she had said, I asked her what was wrong and she pushed me away. She got mad. She came back to me later. She apologized. And she said, and again, I'm not from Richmond, Virginia. She was basically, I'm paraphrasing. She was like, there's a scene of these neo-Nazis and they wear these black metal band patches at shows
as their kind of under Nazi shit. And he wore it to a show that was predominantly black people, and she felt that he knew what he was doing. The kid was like, I don't see this band. I think the dude's stupid, but it's like, whatever. Because,
I know people like that.
How about this, though, Jason? Like, would you say that kid learned something? He got fucking socked, but did he fucking learn something?
Mm-hmm. I hope.
Maybe.
You know,
I mean, I know
he
kids.
definitely couldn't say again, oh, I didn't realize it.
The problem I had was after the fact, the headliner got on and kind of bragged about it. And when you guys are telling these stories about fighting Nazis, you guys are fighting people that are coming there with bad intentions. I think there's this is just me. I think there's a difference between a dumb kid and bad intentions.
You know, that's totally fair. And so that's rather than having sort of a prescriptive answer. I mean, I really genuinely, I think it's important more than to say like, man, we got to just punch these guys in the face. I think it's better for me to ask, you, Jason, or you,
John,
like what do you think would be helpful? Like what are things that could be, create some kind of contextual difference,
I don't think here's my thought is she had a visceral reaction to something. Yeah, and honestly, I've definitely over the last, I'm 48 years old, so I'm not going to haul off and punch somebody at this point in my life. I mean, but when I was much younger, maybe I would react to something, or maybe not. But I guess the point is that I know people that I had a good friend of mine who's First Nationer, and he used to love Berzoom. He doesn't listen to Berzoom anymore, and that's only been within the last 2 or 3 years. But he was like, well, I don't care. I can separate the music from the band or the person. I personally can't do that, but some people say they can. Maybe that's what this kid thought. But that girl actually obviously had a visceral reaction to seeing it. But I think when you're on, at least from my opinion, being black, you rarely get the benefit of the doubt when you do stuff like that. And for the kid wearing that patch, just thinking, well, it's just a band. Well, that's privilege. He can do that.
I absolutely agree.
I mean, he can. Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, and for her, I'm glad that people were able to talk about it to get the context, like you said, Paul. But in that moment, sometimes you're gonna feel these hands. That's just what's gonna happen. I mean, because it's so many times before it's happened the other way, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or indifferent. I just think that you feel I know for myself, my cat's just incessantly meowing at me. I personally, in talking about shows, talking about going to shows and being in, for me, there's never any diversity. It's a sea of white people. And I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan around a lot of white people. I've always been surrounded by white people. Always knowing that I'm black. It took me a long time to actually really understand, even though I had my parents and I had my siblings, because I grew up with so many white people and being the only one in places, or to really even understand what it is to be a black person in this country.
You would have lost your shit at that show.
Yeah, I would have. I probably would have started. I probably would have cried. There was a show here in Madison where it was when I was in Tyranny. It was us, this band 12s. It's really good, kind of shorty U.S. Maple Jesus Lizard clone band. This band Carbon Bangle. They had my man Terrence in it, and my man Terrence, and I had 2 black people in it, and Salvation from Chicago. That's kind of getting some run right now. His black bass player Victor. First time I've ever seen more than one band with a black member in it, much less 3 of the 4. Mm-hmm. I actually shed a tear. And I was telling people, like, throughout the club, like, I've never seen this before. I've never been at a show, just period. Whether I was going to see a show, I've gone to 3 different CMJs and never run into that. And I don't know how many bands I've seen I saw at CMJ conferences.
But to your point, John, that entire tour was like that, and we were running into things that people were saying to us at certain venues that I had never heard before. Like, they told us about how woke this one spot was going to be in Toronto. They're like, Toronto is like, you can't say anything wrong in Toronto because that's where the woke shit is, and motherfuckers in Toronto, fuck you. And I'm like, word? Okay, whatever. I seen Degrassi Junior High. I'm not really that frightened. And so we had went to this this interesting art shop in downtown Toronto, and they asked if we were a band, and we of course said yeah, because you're looking cool. You got your cool band guy shit on, and we've all done it. Everybody on this chat has done it. And so they said, where are you playing? We told them where we were playing, and they were like, oh, that place won't allow white people in if they reach a certain capacity of white people. I was like, word? That sounds like the dumbest shit I've heard in my life. And that's like a real thing. And they looked at me mad. These were 2 white ladies. They looked at me mad like I didn't get it. Like I'm supposed to be juiced about that. I'm like, why would I be juiced about that? What if them was the 2 white people that was going to buy all the shirts?
Well, what's funny though? I mean, thinking about like what's been said here, like we're when thinking about like coming to recognition about what it means, like what race means in America for all of us from all of the different contexts. It's one thing to be, it's one thing to come to terms with the cultural conditions that are imposed on us when you're a group that's historically been disenfranchised. But I think that something that's interesting to think about is that most white people really haven't ever thought about what it means to be a white person in America very much. And I know, like in my family's history, my cousin, or he's my uncle, call him, he's my second cousin, but my Fred Marshall is a jazz player. Mm-hmm. And so he came up in Arkansas in the segregated South in the 50s. So he'd play in, back then the clubs were segregated. So you could play in juke joints if you were a black person. You'd play in honky tonks if you were white, So to play with the fucking dudes he wanted to play with, he had to play in segregated joints, And he's told me a story, before he passed away. He was in the Vince Guaraldi trio. He played on the Charlie Brown Christmas record and stuff like that. He's a good fucking player, good bass player. But he told me some pretty crazy stories about like the raids that would happen back then. And I mean, there was a lot of cultural pressure and shit like that. And, you go through stuff like that and you have some realizations about like where you're from and like what's really happening, because you're breaking the rules, and it's only in that kind of context that people can really start to question the paradigm that they live in and start to think about the broader context, I think, Mm-hmm. And I think that what you have been talking about, Jason, is true, that this is sort of like this is like the final island for some of these folks who are like white dudes that just it seems to me feel threatened. You know, they feel like the having to think about it is threatening. You know,
I mean, y'all been getting threatened since Rush Limbaugh took over the airwaves in the 80s. I mean,
yeah, I think that's,
you know what
true.
I mean? Basketball. You remember when white people played basketball?
Yeah, but I think it's true, and it's like there's a guy that I play, have like jammed with here and there who, you know, we were talking about, you know, current events kind of stuff, you know, in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the public reaction to that, and he was genuinely asking me questions. This is a white dude, you know. And he was like asking real questions about kind of like, you know, history and political context, you know. And that's cool, you know. I think though that a lot of times there's this sort of like visceral, just defensive reaction, and that's kind of where we're at. You know, it seems like that's the springboard for a lot of the stuff that we're
And let me ask you guys.
We see like in the demographics that I was talking about earlier, like, you know, where you have these like really sort of like outsized percentages of people who are really supportive of Trump. You know,
let me ask you this question then. So when I think there's a lot of people in heavy music that are Trump fans, but I also think there's a lot of people in general that are not Trump fans.
Sure, of course.
And that being said, when I was playing these shows in these rooms, I always wanted to thank the crowd for letting us be here, because I felt like I was kind of imposing on someone's territory, right? And we were getting really great responses from people. How do we grow this broader left movement? Because as much as we want a Bernie Sanders in office, he can't get a lot of those things passed without real movements, right? Movements is what changes shit, right? Yeah. Abe Lincoln didn't just wake up one day and say slavery's over. FDR didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what you bitches need? Social Security. Booyah. Like, that's not how that shit works, right? So how do we incorporate these really interesting scenes of people of color in heavy music? Because there's some cool music these cats are making, but they're keeping it so in this micro scene. How do we get it out and get it to more people and just get more people involved? And this is what you do for a living. 1 second, Paul. I want to get Josh's answer, then I'm gonna get you. Yeah,
I mean, I want to thread. First of all, I just want to say, I know I just met a lot of you. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I want to actually hit, let me thread a few different points that I heard each of you make to answer that. To go back to, Jason, what you were originally saying with the story about the patch puncher. You know, the context that I came out of, you know, like, so the punk scene at that time, it was a youth subculture, right? And it was politicized. And the punk scene that I came out of, you know, it was like, even the Nazi shit that we were fighting, it was a whole big group of kids who were alienated by the society that we live in, and they either went fringe left or fringe right. And so the fights that happened were that it was the fringe left versus the fringe right, where everyone was just figuring out how to be in the world, you know? And so the ways that every time I saw someone get punched for wearing a patch, which is, I think, at least twice in my life, was from, it was like, for us, it was the influence of Oi music. And so like Oi is this like working class, you know, subculture that gave birth to a weird subgenre of punk music in the UK, and then it migrated to the US, and that's either like very left wing or very right wing, right? And so there's this band Cockspar, where that was like constantly kind of moving between those extremes. And I mean, not Cockspar, Cockspar, yeah, but it was Screwdriver patches.
Screwdriver,
yeah.
Everybody would always be like, the argument people would make was like, I'm just into the music.
Exactly. So that's what. So what Screwdriver was, it wasn't about that band.
Even though it's like, you know,
they were like,
you know?
Yeah. Well, they were just like the stand-in for that conversation, right? So people were trying to have that conversation of like, how much does it, which is about the relationship of politics and the music. And my take on that, to go to your second question, Jason, is like, there's a real difference that like, I think there's an antagonism between subculture and social movements, right? So like, subculture, building a musical subculture is about saying we're different than society, right? And it's about creating a space of belonging and to signal like, I'm alienated by society, so we're going to create this other space over here where we can belong because we don't belong in some other kind of way. And social movements are almost the opposite. Social movements are saying we actually need to lead society, so therefore we need to be a part of it. And that was the contradiction for me as a politicized young person who was in hardcore bands, in crust bands, in the punk scene, but also had these, was also a political organizer. At some point, I felt like I needed to choose between the politics that punk professed and the music in a way where, and what I mean by that is, choose between where I wanted to spend my time. Did I want to spend my time with kids who primarily wanted to hang out with each other and express themselves, which I loved and respected and still love and respect? Or did I want to primarily spend my time with people who are different than me, who wanted to bring new people into the movement? And I think it goes to this debate about like, this like policing of scenes, which is like, on one hand, in the broader society, I'm totally against the whole deplatforming thing. I think the impulse on the quote unquote woke left to try to like police people's language is bullshit. I think that like trying to say that like, oh, this speaker's coming to town, so we're going to shut down their platform to speak, I think that makes the situation worse. But I also think, and Jason, we were talking about this last night, like in my own house, I'm going to keep a clean house. And so if I'm trying to build a subculture that's an alternative to society, all subcultures are literally a set of rules. They're spoken and unspoken social norms, how we treat each other, ways we signal to one another based on how we dress or how we talk or the music we listen to. We're creating a different world that has all of these codes to follow, right? And like, and so it's just a question of which codes do you want to create to follow. So like, if you're trying to create a scene, like I appreciated what you said earlier. I can't remember your name, and now I can't see you on screen. Paul, is that? Sorry. Yeah. Paul, when you were saying like, a lot of these scenes that are more inclusive, they had to actually build that. Like here in the Bay, Gilman Street had to actually literally lay out a set of rules in spray paint on the wall. And I think that's great if you want to do that. That's not the same thing as activism, though. And so, like, if you're trying to create, a certain cultural space, co-create whatever rules you want. But if you're trying to build a mass movement, that's a whole different thing. If you're trying to build a mass movement, you have to have a much broader open mind to people. The level of like policing of language and behavior needs to go out the window. You need to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You need to make it inviting and stuff like that. And, I think there's also, I mean, to be honest, I also came out of a heavy music scene that didn't want to be popular, that didn't want to be mainstream. And it's only, and I went through a period of my life where I stopped listening to heavy music. And then recently I've come back into it and realized like, oh my God, there's like
people actually like it.
Yeah. It's popular.
It's so fucking weird, dude.
And it's so, but for me, that's like very exciting, and because the way that the punk scene that I came out of was so self-limiting, it hated success. And so the accusation of sellout was so arbitrarily used as one of those self-policing tools. And so to me, there's a real difference between, subculture and movements. And I have a different response to, depending on, what's the goal, which is why I both feel like, punch that dude for wearing the patch and then have a good conversation about it and a lessons learned. And like, because people are working shit out because it's real, versus like, if you're an organizer trying to bring new people in.
Yeah. You don't want to just sock them in the fucking jaw.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that one of the sort of underlying components of that is that if you're talking about like the stuff that would happen at union level organizing, like the stuff that we do at like IWW meetings or like, things that we used to do in DSA and stuff like that. I mean, that's really the goal is really to look at, like you're talking about, Josh, the broader social context. And a lot of that's economic, it's class oriented. We deal with sort of an intrinsic imposition of race on the context of class in the US, and because of the history here and also the history that was imposed on us through just, colonialism and the sort of creation of race as a construct in the first place, So we all have to sort of like live through those contexts. And that's one thing, but I agree with you, Josh. I mean, the question here that we're really talking about is what do we want the world that we're building for ourselves, this little microcosm, to be, And I think that's worth asking, and I think that it's an active process, that it's a real-time process, and that there isn't a fixed outcome. It's like anything else. It could be, if we allow it to be, it could just become something utterly different from what we thought it was to begin with, and that's something that I've really like been wrestling with lately is like, I personally, man, I don't want to be fucking associated with, a context that doesn't represent who I think I am. And, but I've shifted in my life away from just, what I felt was a punk rock culture that became too rigid and too definition oriented, and, I've drifted to kind of trying to find, a context that makes sense for me. And I guess I think I've arrived at this sort of, realization that, we have to make it. We have to make that context. We're not going to be able to just find it,
Yeah, that's right. For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joshua, I really, it's funny what you're talking about with kind of the way the music scene sort of like, can the gatekeeping is sort of inherent and can be okay in the right context, and how like in the broader political spectrum, it's not, it's not pragmatic to be that way. And it's interesting because I have a real weird experience with the music world because I started out like a local scene guy in death metal bands and grindcore bands. And like, it was like a real gatekeepy world. And when I moved out to LA, I was really looking for a band, and like it was really hard to find the right band because everyone was just so like locked into their scene, and I felt a little alien because I came from a world where like it was okay to be like in a grindcore band but also like play thrash metal on the side or whatever, and like in LA it was like very rigid and locked in, and I ended up like sort of falling into like the new metal world, which Jason and I have a whole conversation about that to have, but but that sort of like morphed, and then like the most famous band I was in this moment, they're like a metalcore. Well, at the time they were like a metalcore band, but a very mainstream sounding band. But the thing I noticed about like that weird, that mainstream like band culture, not so much, the fans too, but really like in the band world was like, strangely, it was more diverse and more accepting, even though it was like so highly criticized, because we were playing with like a lot of people of color, like the God Forbid dudes were in our scene, and there were a lot of Hispanic bands, and there were all these bands that were represented like broader cultural kind of inclusion, and so when I look at sort of the democracy of music, it's like and I did eventually sort of go back into my niche music, like I ended up being in heavier bands subsequently, but it was like, it's kind of weird because you can sort of look at politics in the same way, where like the mainstream bands like have the broader appeal, therefore like they kind of encompass some greater ideas. But I mean, a good example of a Bay Area guy who's like killing it right now is Rob Flynn from Machine Head and Violence. And in fact, you look at, I don't know if you guys saw, like Violence is like sort of together again.
Yeah, I saw that.
And they're not.
Sometimes they were practicing that Soundwave.
Yeah, I don't know. They did a video, like this weird anti-mask COVID video recently.
Yeah, I saw that.
I don't know, man. But
yeah,
but long story short, like Rob is doing some good shit. Like he's using his platform to like really just like be very like progressive and like trying to like, but at the same time, like he's not holding like real radical ideals or anything, or like pushing anything that's crazy. Like the idea that like you're against Trump is not a radical idea, and the idea that you might do the pragmatic like fucking middle of the road voting is not a radical ideal. But at the same time, it's like he's got the platform to make those bigger ideas. And I know it's kind of a weird, like I'm getting into just random nonsense at this point, but this is all to say that I think that music does have that, and it's closer to the mainstream. But the problem is that like the subcultures are so resistant to it that it's really difficult to like sweep us all together into like one idea, or just like one, like even just a direction that we can all kind of push together. And so like it makes it hard to do shit like, push the Nazis out of black metal and push the fucking skinheads out of fucking bro metal. And it's like, dude, like we could all, like, we don't have to like the music, but we could all kind of see the value in each other's like roles as mouthpieces for broader social ideals, right?
Well, that's why I think the new metal discussion is kind of when you broaden it. And the question I used to always ask people is, do you think the initial backlash of new metal with the white guys with braids and baggy clothes and the entrance of DJs on the scene, do you think the initial backlash of new metal had a racist undertone to it?
I think that that is a super important thing to talk about, because like, I will not defend it as a music, because a lot of it is garbage, but if you look at the people who are at the front of when new metal blew up, like you've got a lot of people of color, you've got a lot of Hispanic people,
Sepultura,
yeah. You've got, yeah, exactly.
Korn.
And like Deftones. I mean, that's a half Hispanic band, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and like,
it's a fair point,
And the problem is yeah, I feel like there was such a missed opportunity in that period, because like so much of the underground was so like opposed to it, because like what it was doing, like the reason hip hop found its way into new metal is because like these guys came from that world. Like it's not like some white kid was like, I listened to fucking KRS-One and now I want to put that in metal. It's like the kids in that neighborhood wanted to do metal, but like what they knew wasn't fucking deicide, like they brought like their knowledge into it, and it became a little more hip hoppy and stuff. And there are bands that like pioneered that do, kind of go a little further back, like another Bay Area band, Faith No More. And
yeah,
and it's, and another inclusive band too. And it's just like, it's hard to like, I get it. Like there's a lot of garbage in that genre, but culturally, like, that was a music that really did start like on the streets with like people of color, and their influence bled into it. And yes, some bands full of white people kind of got popular because of it, but there are still bands of color in that genre that have.
What we don't talk about from an artistic standpoint, though, is that's that meeting point, though, where the great part of hip hop, you have that 90s era of hip hop where we're sampling from some of the greatest drummers of all time, breakbeat wise.
Oh yeah.
Playing with these metal tones. So, and to Pascual's point, we all here agree a lot of that was dog shit. But some beastly drummers of color that played in that genre, that still play in that genre.
Hell yeah, man.
You know, and we get, System of a Down is a new metal band, and they talk real shit. I know Pascual's not a fan of Rage Against the Machine, but
and I don't dislike. I think Tom Morello is a wicked guitar player. I love his riffs. They just don't hit me where I'm looking for.
Would you lump them in? Would you call them a new metal band though?
Yes.
I would.
I don't know if I really.
I'll call them a new metal band twice on Sunday.
New metal could not exist without Rage, though. That's
it's departing from the new metal debate, and sort of thinking too about the way that there can be this a different perspective given to even black metal, for example. I mean, have you guys listened to Zeal in Our Door?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so, that also Neckbeard Death Camp is another black metal band that's overtly anti-fascist,
Yeah.
So there's other ways that shit can play out, But Zeal in Our Door in particular is interesting. I mean, dude, Swiss, American guy, black dude, in terms of how he presents,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a mixture of gospel and black metal. It's pretty rad,
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think about the way that what you're talking about, Pascal, the way that there was this visceral, angry reaction to new metal, that I do think really did. I think it's true that definitely. I mean, there's no question that I heard a bunch of people call new metal guys wiggers, and on a regular basis.
People have been calling people that forever, though. Even long before that. Man.
But that was their music. That was officially wigger music. That was
but growing up in the '80s, and being around a lot of white people, I listen to hip hop. I listen to punk. I listen to mostly Sonic Youth and Cabaret Voltaire, and I also listen to hip hop. Very, very much listen to hip hop throughout the mid in the late '80s, and I lived on an Air Force base or near an Air Force base, so kids are coming in from all over the country. All the kids that like hip hop were called that. That's where I first heard that term in 1985.
Right.
That's a dead word.
And I get it. I mean, I get how that could really come into play during the new metal scene, but I heard that.
That's a dead term now because white kids in hip hop is a thing. I can tell you now.
It almost got swallowed up.
All them lils with tattoos on their faces.
But hip hop almost had to go back underground again.
But would you,
in order to re-legitimize itself?
No, I think that's part of it, but also in the context of heavy music. So Pascal's talking about the emergence of new metal. Sure. My little cousin is into fucking what's his name, Ghostmane, and so that's a combination of it's a mashup of
hip hop.
It's a mashup of Lil Peep fucking mashup shit with mashing up with black metal with trap fucking
they wear face paint, right?
But let's face it. I mean, that is a really there isn't really a concern about the fucking racial connotation of the music for kids of that generation, But I mean, and it's almost funny. There's this sort of rebirth of new metal. It's more acceptable,
I shouldn't say it's huge again. I shouldn't say it's huge again because, again, without terrestrial radio, without MTV, everything is like this, right?
Yeah.
Those guys were playing arenas. These kids are playing 400 seaters if they're lucky.
People still make fun of Korn though, which, I mean, who wouldn't?
Them hoes play arenas.
Dude, I make fun of them all the time. I would say the first Korn record, the producer was like, I just need that certain something. Hey, Fieldy, throw that bass down some stairs.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, I like it's the thing, like new metal, like I mean, I cannot like there's a lot of it I'm just not down with. But I think a lot of it came up like, and I watched it because I was in it because the bands we were playing with were these bands, and like like for instance, a band I play with a lot, still real good friends with, Spine Shank. So they're a band out of more or less Glendale. That band is basically Hispanic, Filipino, and Armenian. And what they brought to their band was like just a lot of their cultural experience and like, what they were into growing up. And when you listen to the finished product, you hear a very like shiny new metal thing that love or hate it. It is what it is. But that band, like, they didn't listen to Korn and then say they wanted to play Korn. They were just like, this is just how we want to play heavy music. But unfortunately, like that next wave, that sort of like 2000 to 2003 wave of new metal got so overtaken by a lot of that kind of suburban, very white, like
Papa Roach kind of shit.
Yeah. And it's like Papa Roach and like, bands like Drowning Pool and stuff. And again, like don't get me wrong, like that stuff, there's a lot of very overly simplistic riffing, and it's just kind of cheesy and very predictable. But like at the same time, like I will always to my death defend the cultural relevance of it, because it did come from something real, and it did come from a scene that was like people just finding a voice, and I think it just got kind of corrupted by like the mainstream sort of pulling the worst out of it and propping it up. But
that's really interesting, dude. I haven't even really given a whole lot of thought. But we've arrived at a point, like we had that did happen, and it had an impact, and it's resulted in this in a different kind of context for people who are younger. And that like trend line that I was talking about earlier with like the ages of people who are Trump supporter type people, it peaks at people who are in their like late 40s through like their mid 50s. But people who are in their 20s and 30s, I mean, are the least likely people to support that dude, And so it's that happened. There was a lot of resistance to it, but it's possible that, that kind of, has had an impact that's been positive in terms of people being able to really think about just not giving a fuck as much about, like you guys were just saying. I mean, the word wigger, it doesn't even, people don't say that shit anymore.
No, it's deaded. It's deaded.
So, I mean, that's a fucking really positive thing in the larger social context.
You hear it.
The thing is, I still fucking hear that shit in our scene.
Well, is it kind of like that show Cobra Kai? I don't know if you guys watched the Cobra Kai show, where you have Johnny, the bad guy, quote unquote, from Karate Kid, that is learning how to be a decent human from his young Latin protege, right? This young Latin kid is like, no, we don't say things are gay, sensei. That's a bad thing to say. And you don't call women chicks, sensei. You have to be, that's
is totally gay.
But here's another question for you guys when it comes to like people of color and access and music. Working at a studio where bands come in of all ages, it is really fun to see the young kids come in, right? The young kids that just got their new guitars and shit. When you hear these stories of these heroes, Jack White plays his guitar that he got from Sears. Eddie Van Halen got some Sears guitar first. Jimi Hendrix got a guitar from a pawn shop for $20. There's always a story of access to an instrument, and then they made the noise and they went with it. Instruments aren't easy to come by, and where I'm from, I don't even know where you get one, because they don't really have music stores where I'm from. So either you're going to play drums in church, because that's going to be your only access to music if you're a black kid, or shit, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to you. So how do we look at like access to even instruments to even play music? Like who gets to have the access? We cut these programs in a lot of these inner city schools that were music programs where kids could even just pick something up and learn how to play it.
Yeah, man, I was just watching a thing that it was like Duff McKagan and Jerry Cantrell playing like an acoustic song together for Jimmy Carter's birthday.
Yeah, that was
but
cool.
one of the things that was interesting is that while they were talking about it, they were talking about how Carter had funded. Like I was born in 1975. I barely remember Jimmy Carter. I was a little kid, you know. We had music programs though in my school. Like I remember that, and apparently the reason that was true is because there was a glut of funding that included money for what Duff, whatever his name is, was saying was that in his school they actually had like band practice rooms. Like the first band that he ever had, it was fully equipped with like Marshall amps and guitars and you know.
I went to the town I grew up in is a very economically oppressed town. Like there just weren't rich people when I was a kid, and I went to the worst school in that town in middle school. But we did have a music rehearsal performance space in the middle school.
Wow.
and very specifically was named after Jimmy Carter, and we they were like that was it, like whatever funding that had come down federally, because it wasn't state funded at that point, like, or at least whatever built my school, and it was like the worst goddamn fucking school, dude, but like we still had a room where kids could like jam and stuff, and like inexplicably had guitars and had drums and had all this shit. Wow. And it was just like I know that was like local funding. I mean, luckily I grew up in a town where also there's a lot of musicians, and so it was like amazing to see that, because like my school was just so bad in every other way, but like somehow we just had music space.
But think about funny, that.
I'm sorry. We've reached a point where I've always really been interested in the democratization of music, you know? So like, you know, I went to recording school, and when I first moved out here, I started working in recording studios, and I've worked in that like field, you know, for a long time. And it was really, really cost prohibitive. And there's a bunch of different stories about this that I tell people that are sort of like earmarks to like the way that the cost of doing it has just decreased a lot. But it's become accessible. So has distribution. Like anybody could distribute their music with TuneCore. It doesn't, you don't have to have a record label anymore, you know?
You shouldn't.
Probably not, you know, but there are still, you know, gatekeepers to media and stuff like that. Anyway, it has become more democratic than it was, you know, before. But conversely, access to instruments like we're talking about that stuff has become more challenging, more difficult, you know. So there's stratification there. And so you have this sort of like outgrowth, this explosion and shit you can do on GarageBand with synths and fucking, you know, electronic instruments and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of value in that shit, man. But it's like if you're gonna play heavy music and you want to fucking pick up a guitar and learn how to play it, there is a cost barrier to that, man. You know.
Go for it, Josh.
Yeah, it strikes me. So, you know, not in regards to the democratization of instruments, but of platform and accessibility of getting your music out there. I'm curious if y'all have a perspective on the influence of if in the different heavy music scenes that y'all are connected to, if there's more access within the United States to international music. Like it struck me even the way that Pascual, you mentioned Sepultura. Like when I was coming up, one of the influences that builds an anti-racist politic in the scenes that I was a part of was we just listened to a lot of music that was not from Europe or the United States. And so like we loved Japanese hardcore. We loved Japanese hardcore. And we loved, you know, like even a lot of us actually, our entrance into heavy music was actually through the ska scene, in the way that when second wave ska came to the US in the 80s, and even before it kind of picked into kind of mainstream world, a lot of us who came into music through that way were like, oh, this is a Jamaican tradition. This is a tradition from Black folks in the UK, or like in the way that a lot of those scenes were really, really popular in Latin America, which was like gateway for us to listen to all of this like amazing punk from Mexico City and stuff like that. Or all of this like Indonesian hardcore stuff. And all of that really shaped our sense of like what belonged in heavy music, you know, and I know that may not be the case for every subgenre, but my guess is that now with the proliferation of the internet and people's access to it, there's more than ever an opportunity for kids in the US to learn from music scenes that are non-European and non-North American. I'm curious if y'all have seen that or seen the consequence of that at all.
I can say that I grew up, obviously, in my household, listened to a lot of jazz, I had 5 kids in my family. My brother, who's the oldest, he liked Kiss, he liked Led Zeppelin, he liked all that. My sisters liked disco. My 2 oldest were in the disco. My youngest sister, the youngest girl in my family, listened to what was on the radio, and I listened to jazz like my dad. But growing up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, not many other people owned a jazz record or had access to it. It kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of going back on these things. I didn't get a chance to chisel in on some of these subjects. Is that music scenes are so regional, and I mean, at least being from a smaller area, not living in the Bay Area, I still think they are. I mean, I like kids that live in Marquette, Michigan, or Wausau, Wisconsin. Yeah, they might travel to other cities to play shows, but the farthest they're probably traveling, unless they're super ambitious, is within the state that they're in or the surrounding states. So music's still pretty regional if you're not from a populated area, which
I agree with
would
that.
say outside of Chicago. So my point, but going back to what Joshua was saying, is that I think you're right. I think you're 100% right. The more access people have to anything, no matter what it is, music, art, visual art, whatever, the more access all people have to it, the more likely they are to be. I'm keeping an eye on my dog who just had knee surgery over the weekend.
You and your old ass
trying
dog.
to make sure.
Both of y'all old as hell.
She's 3. She blew a knee out already. Come here, Selena. Come on. But anyway, I think that obviously, if you have access to a world greater than your own, you're going to be able to accept that world. You'll be more apt to do so. So yeah, I 100% agree that if schools and kids at a much younger age were exposed to more things, and I think music is one of the easiest ways to do that. We're more exposed. Yeah, that would absolutely contribute to an anti-racist
even
world in this country.
And even when I watch these things, I just discovered this unsung shit. It's like it's like black behind the music.
Watch the unsung about the Silvers.
I've been falling down a rabbit hole about all this shit. I'm watching Unsung on DeBarge and all these black people.
Is good. Johnny Taylor's is really good. All right,
but if you watch it, they talk about like when these guys from back in the day came up, and a lot of these cats like, we got together in high school and we were in the high school band, and I'm like, you had instruments like that in your high school band? To what Pascual is saying, and when I see the kids come into the studio, sometimes I did see kids that were kind of mixed race kids putting bands together, but they always came from families that had some money.
Well, yeah, you had to, a lot of times I remember there were we got recorders. Like we got like little flutes, but like if you wanted to play a real fucking instrument, you had to either buy it or your parents had to rent it to join band, you know? Yeah. But like there, from a cultural perspective, like to what Joshua was talking about, and the idea of sort of like the social impact of music that Pascual was talking about, you know, in terms of the construction of civilizations, if you're thinking about like non-European, like non sort of Western civilization oriented thinking about the development of complex societies, you know, chorale in Peru, which is like probably predates Mesopotamian emergence of civilized societies, was entirely, there was no war. It was entirely oriented around a party culture. And some of the things that have been found at that site, no weapons, but condor bone nose flutes, giant spoons that you'd use to just shovel cocaine into your nose, and huge vats to cook chicha, which is like a corn beer, you know? And like revelry, social context, music, those are the things, those are intrinsically human ways to be able to identify with each other. So the more opportunity we have to be able not just to experience each other remotely through a window, through a screen, but the more opportunity we have to be able to actually experience each other emotionally, you know, to really connect with each other. Mm-hmm. Those are I think that's true. That's a lot of it, is breaking it down. It's funny though, because the converse of that is that the cultural context that we build can become othering, you know, so we can create these subcultures that are intentionally othering, you know, and we can, and that also can spread, you know, so it's complicated. But it's also simple. We have we can choose to celebrate the idea that we can experience all these different things together, or we can choose to really isolate ourselves. You know, I think we have to make a decision about what we're trying to do, you know?
I think you really summed up the contradiction, even in my own relationship to music scenes, of why I keep coming in and out of them and get disillusioned, but then get drawn back in because it's so compelling. It is exactly those contradictions. Yeah.
There's a dualism to everything that humans do. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, everything we commit genocide and we're altruistic, you know? I mean, there's everything that we do has this binary quality to it. But I think we can make decisions about that stuff. That's sort of the advantage, you know. We have the capability to do that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate y'all for having me on. I do have to jump, but it's just fun to get to have a different conversation. So I'm just grateful to get to listen in and hear from y'all's perspective. So thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming through, Josh.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
Good meeting you, man.
Yeah, till next time.
Peace.
Peace.
Later.
And on that note, it is getting late. And I know I'm talking to people in different time zones. It's late for John and Pascual. They got grown people jobs.
Hey, John, I really appreciate meeting you. I appreciate meeting you, Pascual. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, it's nice meeting both.
Really
before everybody goes, can they say, I'll start with Pascual. Can you say what music projects you're working on and all that other good shit?
Yeah, so my active band is Devil's Throne. It's like a Black and Doom band. Yeah, just check us out. Look it up, Devil's Throne. Also, I do a podcast every week called Squaring the Strange. And it's kind of a skeptical podcast. So it's more about, you know, fun stuff like Like I don't know. This week we're doing music. I'm doing a whole skeptical take on a bunch of copyright cases. So those come out every other Thursday. And that's pretty much it for me. I do I'd be remiss not to mention my band Strangled by Strangulation, which is sort of a death metal super group. You'll find a lot of members from other death metal bands joining me on songs, and we put them out every once in a while. So yep.
And John, oops, wrong button. John, before we go, is there anything you want to shout out that you're doing?
Not much, because it's pandemic. I do play in Conan Neutron and Secret Friends when there isn't a pandemic. I am the most of the time live drummer for that band. Also playing in various projects. I can't keep my dog from jumping around. I also play in a few other projects. One that's called Threadmaker, which is a avant-garde improv post-rock band that has anywhere from 4 to 8 members. And we're on Facebook. There's recording there. We're on Bandcamp as well. Same with Conan Neutron and Secret Friends. And I'm also in a band called Lorena with in a new band, actually. I don't really know what it's going to be. I think it's going to be mostly hardcore. It's basically 3 members of a band called Dumpster Dick. I felt like one of the best hardcore bands in Madison. And all LGBTQ or all LGBTQ members. So I'll be the one straight dude, but I'm black, so at least that gives me some cred. Also, that literally just started in the last month or so. So I have that as well. Other than that, just try not to get sick.
So you're still having band practice, John? Sorry, you still having band practice, John?
No. Well, with Lorena, we were trying to plan one, but Wisconsin, we're number one in
fuck
in
that shit.
cases right now. So I
just can't have you sweat on me right now. I can't have you sweat on me right now.
Yeah,
you keep that sweat to yourself. I'm practicing in a hazmat suit. You done lost your goddamn mind. You think you're gonna sweat on me? Band practice, schmactus.
It would be nice to practice. I would love to practice. Just practice.
One of the greatest things I ever heard was wish in one hand, shit in the other. See which one feels first. Because I am not. Man, I first heard that I lost my mind. I was like, that's the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. Paul, I know you got some. Because there's a person doing that right now. It's a Trump supporter. I wish Joe Biden would go away.
Just to see.
Paul, I know you got some irons in your proverbial music fire. What's going on with you?
High Tone Son of a Bitch we're like getting some stuff ready for some like online show type festival things that are happening. There's one that was called Mutants of the Monster. It's like an Arkansas festival. So we're doing that one. That's in it's January 1st and 2nd, and it's moved to like an online format. So we're kind of working out live stream stuff. We're probably going to do that from up in Portland at a recording studio that's in a church called Hallowed Halls, where Billy Anderson, who plays bass for us, makes a bunch of records up there. And then I have relaunched my old record label with a tape series, it's all cassettes of a bunch of bands. So High Tone Son of a Bitch, it's retrospective of our of all the EPs that we put out. It's like a 2-tape thing on that label. And then Ales, who are fucking just awesome. Talking about sort of like inclusive black metal. It's a black metal band from Oakland that include, it's 2 women, ex Ludacra, just fucking awesome, like street sort of crusty black metal, Oakland black metal band. There's a band called Kavara who are from LA. It's ex Goat Snake and 16 dudes. Stanford Parker from Chicago produced that. Just fucking heavy. Reminds me of like Unsane meets Ministry meets Neurosis or something.
Interesting.
It's like sparse but just fucking heavy. And then this band Worshipper, who it's funny, we're on the same record, we're on the same label, like High Tone and this band Worshipper, in terms of our digital release and the CD for our band. But the guy John Brickhouse, who's the singer and rhythm guitar player and lead player, I should just say guitar player from that band, is from the same town that I'm from in Maine. He grew up like a few blocks away from me. He actually was the guy who recorded did the 4-track demo of like the first punk band I was ever in when I was like 14 or whatever.
Goddamn. And
so we're Worshipper is on TP. We're on TP, and then I put out this tape of their last release. He actually played like a guest guitar thing on our last EP too. So that's the shit I'm doing, is the label stuff and still just playing music, That's it.
All right. Well, before we go, I guess I can let you guys go. I can do the rest of the talking. You guys don't want to listen to me talk about books. Do you guys want to listen to me talk about books for 2 seconds? You don't give a shit. You don't give a shit. None of you hoes read. Illiterate hoes.
I got a bookshelf back here. The books I haven't read.
So whenever I see these podcasts, these shows, like even people that are on my show, but I do it where they can't see, audio only. Everyone has this bookshelf behind them with all these books, and I'm trying to figure out a way to get my bookshelf behind me so I can have my books. I was like, fuck it. You get the high chair, because that's how I live my life. I feed this little black ass kid here. But the book picks I have for people for this week that I think people should get, first and foremost, Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is a great book for anyone that's ever told you that socialism's killed 300 million people.
Yeah.
Give them this book, and it really puts into context things like the Soviet Union and China. And just basically what socialism is all about, which is not bigger government control. Also, a woman that was on my show, a wonderful book called Prejudential by Margaret Kimberly. This book basically is about every president and the like she went through every fucking president and basically the history of race and presidents and kind of how every president has a shitty racial past. And to my earlier guest today, the makers of the Kahn, Eric Vaughn, Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz. This really breaks down the 2008 financial crisis, the subsequent foreclosure crisis, and does it with human stories of real people that actually got harmed by it. So you can really see what was done, because some people lost a little bit, but they didn't lose everything. And this really puts into perspective that the people that were a part of this, they didn't just make literally billions of dollars. They got positions in the government. You know, Donald Trump was literally a part of this. Steve Mnuchin, who is now the Treasury Secretary, was the big winner. So this is kind of as we walk into 2020 and everyone is going, yay, Biden. And I do think Biden's going to win the election. Books like this are very important so we don't make these same mistakes again moving forward towards 2024.
Hey, Jason, on the book tip.
Yes.
It's interesting. My mom is part of a group called Indivisible that a lot of what they're, pretty like liberal, kind of middle of the road type folks who send letters to their representative to ask them to please, stop, please help, but, she's forwarded me an email that they had sent out, and some of those people are just, they're genuinely concerned about social breakdown and, the potential for, what could happen if there's a contested election and stuff like that. So she asked me for a couple of books about what to do if that happens,
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a couple of things that I would mention besides sort of the AK Press have a great book called Militant Anti-Fascism that's a history of confronting that kind of stuff on the street. Or there's another book called Fascism Today that AK Press also did. But I think separately, there are two things that I think are interesting for people to think about. There's this guy, John Curl, here in the Bay Area, who wrote a book that PM Press published called For All the People.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a history for folks who are less interested in sort of like theoretical discussion about this kind of stuff, but just like practical application. For All the People is a history of in the United States of collective and cooperative efforts that people have made. And it looks at why they have either succeeded or haven't. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important to think about. And then another book that I think is really great that people should, that has sort of application to the time we live in now, is a book called Ready for the Revolution. It's a collection of letters that folks in the CNT sort of administrative side and the defense committees were writing to each other during the Spanish Civil War. And that's a window to our to our modern moment. How do we understand what the truth is, and what are the things that we're really trying to do, and so anyway, those are also pretty cool, I think.
Anybody else got a book recommendation? Your mic's out, Pascual.
Okay, sorry. I was going to hop in with a little Richard Wolff. He did a book, Understanding Marxism. That's really good too.
Yeah, that's a great book.
It's like that one was my introduction to him, and I really enjoyed it. I read it last year, so highly recommend his work.
Oh, I love Richard Wolff. John?
I'm illiterate. Yeah, I'm illiterate. Illiterate whore. I think you
got a podcast to pump or something.
Paul, what town in Maine are you from?
I was trying to write this guy back. I don't know how to do it. Maybe you can do it for me. I'm from. I grew up in Lewiston.
He says that's 30 minutes away from him.
Yeah. I grew up in Lewiston, Maine.
Yeah, that's Marcus from the. He's from another show that I am on from time to time, and sometimes they're on this show. They're pretty fucking rad. The Left Flank Vets, they're pretty dope. I lived in
Lewiston until I was like able to figure out how I could scam, steal, and borrow my way to live in Portland, which is, it's funny. It's like out there, it's 30 minutes. It's like a 30-minute drive. But coastal Maine's just like, it's a whole different world, Central Maine, especially Lewiston. I mean, you're at the end. It's the end of Appalachia. It's really, it's serious fucking poverty. And it's also like when I moved there, we moved there in 89, I guess. And the textile mills had started closing in the 70s, like deindustrialization in America had really began in earnest in the 70s. So by the time we lived there, I mean, there was just nothing. I mean, there were no jobs, there were no factories, people had no fucking hope. It was really fucking grim. It was just crazy grim, dude. So you'd go to Portland and there would be people who had like Boston defense money who would, it's an hour and a half drive from Boston. It's a commute, but where we lived, it was just a little too far,
Mm-hmm.
And so there was just nothing there, Now it's all call banks, man. They make, Boston Brands has, hey, libs. Boston Brands makes Fireball whiskey there. And, the only other stuff that's there is like TD Bank have a call center. Visa have a call center. When they were thinking about where to locate their call centers, the other choice was India. Like they're able to just pay people dirt fucking money and be, 2 hours away from Boston, So that's the kind of shit that people who live up there have always been fucking contending with, Somebody who's ringing a bell and telling them what to do, and otherwise they don't know what to fucking do.
So here's my next question to you guys. I'm gonna put you on the spot. Is there any way I can get you guys to come back again and we have another discussion?
It's possible.
I'm down. I just gotta have like a day heads up. I should be good.
Yeah.
I will get better with my heads up. And we won't go so late. Maybe we'll start earlier for you people that live so far away like John.
Yeah, no worries, man.
I'm fine.
All right, cheers, guys.
I'm fine.
Hey, have a good
I'm
night,
out.
everybody. Thank you guys for watching the show. It's called This is Revolution Podcast. Every Tuesday night, we do this wonderful live stream. Thank all my guests today. Eric Vaughn from the Kahn documentary docuseries. Pascual, Joshua, Jonathan, Paul. I'm so happy to call you guys homies. So thank you guys very much. And I am out.